What's up, everybody? Welcome to Puzzle Huddle with Experts. I have another fantastic guest, Dr. Marguerite Matthews. She's a PhD scientist, a neuroscientist. She has a lot of insight and information. She's connected with Puzzle Huddle, so she knows what we're all about. I'm very excited to talk to her and hopefully learn about her path through STEM from childhood to adulthood, and learn about some of her research and some inflection points and insights that we can share with our wide audience in terms of parenting and teaching and education and building the pathway for our young people. So thank you and welcome today.
Thanks for having me.
If you could walk us through your academic and professional background, just so we can get grounded in who you are academically and professionally.
Absolutely. So I am currently working at the National Institutes of Health. Probably most people are more aware of that place now with multiple pandemics sort of raging. Right. But I work specifically in an institute called the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, where we fund and research various diseases and conditions of the brain and the nervous system. So I help people get grants who do that sort of work, particularly those who are in undergraduate education, all the way up through folks who are just starting their independent careers as sort of grown-up scientists, as I like to say. And I got here because I was interested in science, but I did not expect to do this as a career. I liked science enough to study it in college. I got my bachelor's degree in biochemistry at Spelman College, and I did some research in neuroscience related labs. And so I went on to get a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Pittsburgh, but it never was really my intention to go that route. I thought I was going to be a writer. I thought I would be writing novels about, teenage girls, sort of coming of age stories, not anything about science, not even remotely close to science. So it's sort of interesting to be a scientist who's helping other scientists become scientists, if that makes sense. So it was a really interesting way to get here. But when you look at my resume, it makes sense how I got here. Like, yeah, she got she went to college for science, she got her PhD in science, and now she's doing other things related to science. And it sort of just worked out that way. It wasn't really part of my plan, so to speak. So.
All right. I want to talk about your childhood, but you said Spelman, so I want to talk about Spelman because we love our sisters from Spelman.
Absolutely.
What were some of your favorite college experiences?
Oh my gosh. So funny enough, I just was watching a video of Angelina Jolie doing line dances with a bunch of Spell House folks in LA because her daughter, Zahara.
Yeah, that's right. I saw.
Yes, she's going to be going to Spelman. So that was one of my favorite memories, is going to a Spell House send-off. Before I left San Diego, California, going clear across the country to a city I had only visited once before, Atlanta, Georgia. And just the way people embrace you and want you to succeed simply because you exist and you are about to be part of that world. And that carried through all 4 years of my Spelman experience, just feeling supported, challenged, very much so challenged academically, also emotionally, but always having someone there to say, this is hard, it's going to be hard, it's not going to be easy, but I'm going to make sure you have the tools to succeed. And so my best memories are with friends, kind of going through that process. Just education is second to none, but also even the moments where I thought, like, I'm going to fail out of school, like there's no way that I can get through this, and having people always right there to sort of keep you floating and moving forward. All of that is just like, it was surreal. And every time I see a clip about Spelman, I get so excited, and I just remember the good old days. Like, man, if I could do it all over again, I would definitely relive my college years for sure.
I'm going to get to your childhood, but the Spelman thing, how did you become aware of Spelman as an institution from California, and then to the degree that you wanted to now go to that university? Because from California to Georgia, there's quite some ground to cover.
Absolutely. And funny enough, California makes up the second highest population of students who attend Spelman College. So Georgia, New York, and California are like where most of the students come from. I guess probably because California is quite a large state and folks want to sort of get out. But I had an HBCU dad. My father went to Howard. His brother went to Howard. My sister went to Howard. So I knew about HBCUs early on. And my mom sort of constantly was
I love this whole thing. I love it.
Yeah, my mom used to always say, you're going to go to Howard, Spelman, or Fisk. And I don't know how Fisk got in there because I've also never been to Nashville. But she knew people who went to those schools in addition to my dad. And she always felt like, I know you will be well taken care of if you go off to one of these schools or any HBCU. They were very much, you should get out of the house. You should leave home. You shouldn't stay here. I didn't even apply to any schools in California. Spelman was the only school I applied to. I applied early admission because I figured if I don't get in early admission, I can, apply to my backup schools. And Stanford was my backup school, if you can imagine. I guess if I had to stay in California, I'll go to Stanford, not a big deal. And I got in and I threw away back in the day, I applied with paper applications. So I threw all my applications away and I was like, I'm going to Spelman. And my dad brings it up all the time that, I would be so much better off if I had graduated from Howard, or, it's too bad you're not a Howard woman, but it's okay. We'll settle for you being a Spelman woman kind of thing. So ongoing joke in the family, but definitely going to a HBCU wasn't ever a thing that felt like a step down. It was always this is a very prestigious thing. You are smart enough, capable enough, and the best place for you to be, given all of that, is an HBCU. And so I'm grateful to have parents who, one, allow me the freedom to do that, but also I never felt like Blackness was something that was inferior or was lesser than. Some of my classmates, when I told them I was going to Spelman, they're like, why would you want to go to an all-Black school? Why would you do that? You're so smart. You could go anywhere you wanted to. And I was like, I know, that's why I'm going to Spelman. Kind of thing.
Did you go to diverse schools through your, elementary, primary, high school? Were those diverse schools or were those?
They were diverse in the sense that they were not all white. Growing up in Southern California, as you can imagine, huge Hispanic population, mostly Mexican, but we also had a really vibrant Pacific Islander community as well. And so I went to school with a lot of Southeast Asians, Mexican. We had a few other Hispanic, a few Puerto Ricans and other South American folks there. Not a lot of Black folks. I think San Diego is only 7% Black, but I never felt like I was, just one person in a sea of otherness. I always had, I went to a Black church. My pediatrician was Black. My dentist was Black. I had a lot of Black friends in school. So the diversity was there. And I felt like I live in a place that's really quite colorful, until I went to Spelman and I came back and I was like, this was really not diverse at all. Everybody kind of looked the same. And I just so happened to go to schools that were very, very diverse. But San Diego is not known for its diversity by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, and one thing I love about HBCUs is you get diversity by a different slice, because it's Caribbean, it's African, it's multiple perspectives on Caribbean and multiple perspectives on African. So you get Black, but it's just not a universal Blackness. There's lots of versions of it.
Absolutely. And when you think even the regional differences within the United States, on my floor in my dorm room, we had a lot of girls from New York and New Jersey, and that's the way they talked, the sort of things that they just the way in which they thought was very different than my very California sort of, laid back sort of chill vibe. And then of course I had a roommate from Georgia, and her family life and structure were all just very different. And it was so beautiful just to see how everyone kind of brought their own perspectives and were, doing their thing wherever they were. And we all come together, and it's now it's just a bunch of baddies, we're all all of us are smart, all of us are capable, but we're capable and smart in different ways. And it was just so cool to see how that all sort of melted together. And yeah, I definitely learned a lot from that level of diversity. It certainly wasn't like being with just a bunch of people who were like me, which was amazing.
Yeah, now I'm working my way. We're almost back to your childhood. To whatever degree it was an influence, what did your parents do professionally? Because sometimes scientists are born of other scientists. What were the career paths of your parents?
Yeah, so I'm somewhat stereotypical in that way. My father is a physician, a family physician. So he went to Howard undergrad and medical school.
Okay,
And so, but my dad was, funny enough, my dad was very much a scientist. Like he loved learning and thinking about problems. Like he's a man that if you go to their house today, he's got a book on math or physics or something that he just reads casually. Or if he's on his computer, he's looking at YouTube videos of like just various math theorems, and he'll just watch it. And then he'll say, Marguerite, do you want me to teach you about X? And I'm like, no, I don't. I actually have zero interest in that. And I wasn't like that at all as a kid. I was curious, but I wasn't so invested in science that was all I did. Like if you saw me as a kid, you would never expect me to go on to be a scientist, other than having a father who loved science. My mom was more, she liked math. And she was more into like the different levels of math, but she also wouldn't consider herself like a scientist, or she has an appreciation for science, but she is not curious in that same way. Like I didn't have a science kit. Like I didn't play with, I wasn't outside collecting bugs and wanting to study them. That's disgusting. Like the only time I was outside was to hang out with my friends and play Barbie dolls. But I was not interested in being a scientist. If you told me I would be a scientist, I'd be like, that's dumb. Like I'm a girl and I'm cute. So why would I be a scientist? That's not even two things that go together.
So from what you can recall, what do you remember some of your favorite toys being that you played with as a kid?
Definitely my dolls. Like I'm the youngest by a lot, by many, many years. And so I grew up mostly by myself. And so my dolls and my toys, my like stuffed animal type of toys, were the things that I played with. So I had active imagination, again, probably why I wanted to go on to be a writer and have stories about my life as a kid and my dolls. And I had, gifts that other people gave me. Like I loved puzzles. But, I wasn't really big into, I didn't have a cooking, I didn't have the cooking set. So I wasn't really into cooking. Like I said, I didn't have a science kit or anything like that. Every now and then I like to play doctor, but I liked it more from the aspect of like getting to work with my dolls. So I would be a doctor because I'm taking care of my dolls and making sure my dolls aren't sick, and that they're well and all that stuff. But yeah, I was probably like your typical girl in the sense that I love playing with my dolls and playing with my friends. I didn't have a lot of extra other things that I was interested in, or that my parents pushed. Like they might try to get me to do XYZ, but it wasn't really, they just kind of like, they knew that I liked dolls. And so dolls was sort of where I stood for a long time.
All right. Well, were there any other structured extracurricular activities? Was there some dance or softball or swimming? What's
I tried softball, but let me tell you, my sister's not coordinated at all. All of my siblings are athletes, like track, baseball, football, basketball. I was a swimmer. I was on the swim team in high school. I did play a musical instrument like from 4th grade all the way up through college. So I loved music. I love to listen to music, but I also like to play music. So I started off on the clarinet, and then I learned how to play the French horn, the string bass, and a few other percussion instruments. So I was definitely like a band nerd.
Like the upright bass?
The upright bass. Yep.
Okay.
So I played in the orchestra and I played in the jazz, our jazz ensembles. So I got to do a bunch of different type of music, marching band, but also symphonic band with like these big orchestra sounds. That was definitely the lane I was in. So again, I don't know if anybody thought that I would go on to be a scientist. Like they thought maybe I might go on to study music. But studying music seemed too hard, actually. Science is easy. Walk in the park compared to studying music.
This is the hard. you
Yeah.
definitely pursue something hard. So if you if you think music looked like a hard thing,
It was more the lifestyle. Like it just felt like so much had to go into it, like all the auditions and
yeah.
having to go to a music conservatory school, and that's all you did. I was very much like, fly by the seat of my pants. Like I wanted to do whatever, wherever the wind blew me, that's where I wanted to be. Whatever, like mood struck me, I wanted to do that thing. And so the idea of being locked into making music my life, I was like, that's really hard. Like I would have to just change everything that I am to be able to become a musician. But I loved it. Like I had really famous, I guess, instructors who I got a chance to work with. Like looking back, it's a shame that I didn't do more with my music, because I had such great teachers all throughout my my education. But yeah, that wasn't the thing that I was going to do. And science, I was like, well, I could do anything with science, right? That's easy for me, an easy life to live.
Before we get off of this music thing, do you maintain right now today a skill set on any instrument? Could you get through a familiar tune on any of those instruments?
I think I could. I probably could pick up my clarinet, which my mom still has mine in her closet somewhere. I have to dust off all the cobwebs, but yeah, I think I could play. And the string bass, like I have made a commitment to myself that when I get rich and famous, any day now, any day, that's going to happen. I'm going to buy myself an upright bass, and I'm going to start taking lessons again, because it is such a beautiful instrument. And even more than jazz band, like that was fun, but I loved using the bow and just hearing, the vibration of the strings, like so awesome. I don't know if I would be any good, but I'm sure I could do a couple of runs on a bass if I had one.
And related to your neuroscience, that whatever frequency it is that comes out of those has to be soothing on like a really scientific level. It's not just the familiar tune, but
absolutely. Absolutely. I've really admired a lot of neuroscientists, especially, who have studied music and the impact of music, especially like the healing properties of music, and just how learning music changes the brain. Like there's a lot of neuroimaging studies about the impact that music, especially musicians, that it has on the brain. It's all fascinating. I love that there's someone studying that and learning more about that, because I almost feel like if I had stayed with it, I would have enrolled in so many different studies. Like, look at the brain, find out what's going on in there in my musical mind.
All right, land this passion for science in your background, because you mentioned writing and musical instruments. Where did the hard science become something that you want to pursue? Like, what was the inflection point or the transition point where you got you hooked into that to pursue versus the writing or the music?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think when I look back, science was always a part of like all of my life. Like when I made Kool-Aid with my dad, he would talk about like the properties, chemical bond properties of, these packets of these crystals, how bonds are being broken to make Kool-Aid. Wow. And so a lot of just day-to-day life was made into sort of these science experiments. And so I had a friendly relationship with science without it being like, oh, you're doing an experiment. It was just, this is something that's happening. Or my dad, when I had, projects that I had to do, he would always just ask me questions while we were working on things. And he made me feel very comfortable with asking questions, answering questions, trying to figure things out. And so I guess I never saw science as like a separate thing. Like when I thought about scientists, I thought about like old white men that look like Albert Einstein. But when I think of when I think of a scientist, I think of my dad, and not just because he's a physician and he's a total nerd and loves science, but because he asks questions and he tries to figure it out. Like we'll just sit and work through something. And so when I was in school, I loved science class. When we were dissecting frogs and squid, I wanted to have the scalpel. All my friends would be like, ew, that's nasty. I'm like, give me the scalpel. I want to just cut open into this thing. I want to find out, like, what does this do? And so I liked science, and I think I had a good relationship with science and my teachers and all the people who made me feel like science isn't something hard. It's something that you should enjoy, and that you can like science without wanting to be a scientist. So I enjoyed just sort of tinkering around when I had the opportunity. I didn't seek it out necessarily, but it was definitely something that I felt science is for me, because I do science all the time. Like science is all around. You go outside and you want to know what the composition of the dirt is. That's science. Or why is the grass green? Why is the sky blue? Those are all scientific questions. I think why I liked the other subjects so much is because I felt like I could be myself in those things. In writing, I got to express myself, and science felt more rigid at the time, that there's all these rules and you sort of have to follow the rules. And I was a rule follower, so that didn't bother me, but I never felt like I can make science like my thing because it was too set. And it wasn't until I got to college and beyond that I started to realize that that is not really how science works. There's so much opportunity for you to put yourself into it, but I had to be put in that situation in order to sort of follow it. So yeah, a lot of things were very serendipitous, but yeah, science is, I feel like science, we think of science as just a subject, but really it's so much more than that. It's exploration, right? And if we can make science appealing to people just by them doing it and not putting a label on it, not having to do biology, physics, or whatever the case may be, engineering, that folks will just explore and learn, especially kids, like when they're just getting a chance to tinker around, then that can make it feel much more approachable.
Yeah, if your father was present enough to think of making Kool-Aid and this isn't just sugar and water, and this is it's science, because there's a chemical reaction going on. Wow.
Yeah.
So if you had to summarize, your parents, from what I could just, this short time with you, did a heck of a job just creating the structure and the developmental experience to set you on a path to do something fantastic. What do you think? What do you think your parents' strong suits are, or what? If you're making recommendations for parents in terms of developing their children, like what did your parents just do an awesome job doing that you think is worth repeating or sharing with other families?
Oh, that's such a good question. So much of this is obviously hindsight, and I know both of my parents were parents before I came along, but again, I was sort of a special case. I'm the only child they have together, and their kids, their other kids were grown and sort of out of the house by the time I was coming of age. So when my mom tells it, it was like starting over a little bit with me and trying to relearn things. And I'm so different than my siblings. But I think one thing they did a great job of is sort of letting me be who I was. Like I was very talkative. You would think, I mean, thankfully, if I had been in the wrong school system, I probably would not have graduated from high school, because I always had poor marks on behavior, but it was because I'd be talking. And why was I talking? Because I was done with my work. I finished my work. I want to talk to somebody. And so the teachers would always be like, Marguerite is a great student, but she talks too much. Like I always have to go, put her in the corner because she's talking. And my mom was kind of like, if you notice that she talks when she's done with her work, why don't you just give her more work? She just needs something to do. She's not trying to be disruptive. She just, it feels like I'm done. So now it's time to like do whatever. And so my mom, not trying to change me, but allowing me to sort of find ways to help me get through sort of the, more mundane aspects of schooling, I think was really important. And also just allowing me to play with my dolls, be whatever, not trying to force me like, okay, we got to get you into a science program. So you have to be working on this, working on that. You have to do music. It's like, do you want to try this? Okay, if you're going to try it, you have to stick to it. You've got to sort of, if we're going to invest in this, you have to be committed at least long enough for a year. And then if you want to do something else, you can. So that flexibility, but also exposing me to different things. Like I liked music a lot because I got a chance to go to the symphony, the San Diego Symphony, which very privileged to be able to do. Not everyone's able to do that, but they took me to different events like that allowed me to just see that the world is so big. And it doesn't, I don't have to think small. I don't have to only be one thing. And as much as I know my dad would have loved for me to go on to be a doctor, he never, ever forced that on me. It wasn't like you have to go to medical school or you have to do any certain thing. They wanted me to stay focused, get good grades, do well in school, but not for any other notoriety other than you need to be invested in something. And so if it's going to be school, if it's going to be music, if it's going to be swim, whatever, you need to give it your all, because nobody wants someone who just does a half job at something. Like, you have to be willing to commit to it. And as long as whatever it is you choose that you're going to commit to, then we're behind you 100%. So I got like that discipline aspect of it too, without it being so rigid that I felt I needed to be rebellious or, whatever.
Yeah, now take me. We're going to jump forward into your foray into science and your PhD. What is it that you study for your PhD? And if you could hand this to me with first grade, second grade terms, I'm going to try to track with you in terms of what the
You're going to get it. It's not super complicated. Okay. So for my PhD, I worked on so many different projects. But one thing that my lab specialized in was schizophrenia. And
wow.
Schizophrenia is a psychiatric disorder that starts to show up in adolescence. So usually teenagers, late teenagers, they start exhibiting symptoms, and then they go on to, it usually goes on to be sort of exacerbates later on in their adulthood. But for people, most of the time for a diagnosis for that illness, you have to have symptoms of it in adolescence. And there are a lot of psychiatric illnesses that are like that the symptoms start to show up in adolescence. And then they progressively get worse as one becomes an adult. And so what I wanted to know was, why is this particular period of time so vulnerable, where you might have a psychiatric illness, or, that's an age that kids are more likely to do drugs and to abuse drugs. Mm-hmm. And so there's some switch that happens oftentimes when you see people who have addictions. It usually happens at that adolescent stage. Yeah. And so trying to understand why that period of time is so vulnerable. I mean, we know a lot about teenagers. Certain behaviors are associated with being teenagers. And is it a benefit or it's like all adolescents of every sort of mammalian class all have this like strange stage characterized by very specific behaviors. And I wanted to know, what's going on in the brain, and the reward system specifically. So the dopamine that's released in the brain, why is it sometimes it goes through this normal sort of, development for some people, and then for other people, it sort of goes haywire. And so that's what I was studying, using different models of that system to understand, like, so what is it supposed to look like just to like normal stuff, like with this levels of risky behavior and other things like that are typical of all adolescents. Why is it, what's going on there, and is there something that potentially can be done to intervene to sort of save that system from having some of these other issues like an illness or being subject to addiction?
Yeah, a lot of these, I'm going to use the wrong words, but it's these mental challenges, ADHD, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, a lot of it's going to come out in adult. What are some of the symptoms that we might observe for those parents that are raising teenagers or adolescents or in a community where there's teenagers? Well, what are some things that we might observe that fall outside of normal teenage behavior and might be to the point where this might be a mental challenge?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And so much of childhood and adolescence is rife with just bizarre behavior. Kids, bouncing off the walls. Like a kid who's super hyper is not necessarily indicative of ADHD, right? Or some hyperactivity disorder. And a kid who can't pay attention well is not necessarily an inattention disorder. But there may be some other things that parents notice that there's something different. Like the behavior just is very exacerbated. Like maybe the kid is too off the walls all the time, and it doesn't matter what they eat, how much sleep they got. It's like clockwork. There's always something going on. Schizophrenia, the symptoms are quite a bit more harsh and maybe more disturbing. So that might be more obvious. But I think the important thing for all development is regular visits to the doctor and telling the doctor when something seems off, because sometimes it seems off to you, but it's just because the kid is getting on your nerves, or it's a teenager and it's just being a teenager. And so they are, they're super sassy and they want to stay out all hours of the night. That's, in some respects, that's normal. But if it becomes where there is like excessive behavior, like binge drinking, binge smoking, really depressive episodes where teenagers sleeping all the time, not just like a normal amount of like teenagers sleeping in until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but just like never is able to get enough sleep, then those are things that you want to communicate with a primary care physician, and they can help, facilitate whether or not this, the child or teenager needs to go just to therapy because maybe they need to like work out some other things, or if they need to be on medication because there's a chemical imbalance. And I think really embracing that it's okay to correct issues that are wrong. If you break your leg, you're not just going to say, well, your leg will heal on its own, go ahead and keep walking. No, you're going to put a cast on it. You're going to go see a doctor and make sure everything is right, that it's set right, that, that is taken care of. Same thing can happen in our brains. Something goes off and there's nothing you can do. You can't just let it run its course, right? If you've got the wrong sort of wiring going on, or the wrong amount of, neurotransmitter, or not enough of it, you need to be able to sort of fix it. And I think when we allow ourselves to say, hey, these things happen all the time, it's not indicative of something terrible. And the sooner we can fix it or know what's going on, the better we can address it. And I think sometimes it's just sort of paying attention to things. It might be even keeping a journal, like, I noticed this behavior, it seemed weird to me, and then talking to a professional about it, because they're the ones that can say, I do think this is concerning, or, you know what, that it's annoying, but it's not something that, perhaps maybe needs to rise to a clinical level. And talking with teachers, teachers aren't always right. They oftentimes, again, behavioral disorders, you often put kids in the wrong class because you just don't want to deal with them. But like just listening to what they have to say and seeing if that matches up with other things that you've observed. Because the teachers are with the kids well, maybe not so much now in the pandemic days, but in the before days, teachers were with your, oftentimes with your kids during their awake phase more than you were, because you got them, fed them, and then put them to bed. So I think those are things to think about. And not just letting your own idea of what's good behavior or bad behavior dictate it, but, just be open to saying, I need to make sure that someone else is taking a look at what's happening. Because if something is going wrong, you don't want someone to go deep into adulthood only then learning about their condition, right? Like, especially something as serious as a psychiatric illness. It's hard for people to learn how to live with that. It's difficult. And so the earlier you can address it, the better off everyone will be.
Yeah, and as a parent, when you're dealing with, and it's just in my network, when you're observing a person you don't know if it's like a trauma, or if it's adolescents, are their parents going through a divorce? Is there food insecurity? Are they being bullied at school? Are they in an abusive relationship? Is it depression, anxiety? Are they stressed out about school? Or is it something more severe where it's a disorder and may require therapy and medication? Gosh, it's hard to sort through.
It's hard to sort through. The brain is like so resilient in many ways. Like, it does such a good job of protecting us, but at the same time, so many things can go wrong and you just never know, right? Like, it took me all this time to learn that like therapy isn't just for people who have issues. Therapy is for everyone, that you can have an opportunity to make sure that you are sort of, managing life in a way that is consistent with you and your lifestyle and what is like right for you. And I don't think we know that oftentimes earlier on, like, because there are so many different, we call them in neuroscience, insults to the brain, like whether it's physical insults or other disturbances. Stress, too much stress can be really bad for you. Other times stress can be really advantageous. Having a little bit of stress can be beneficial to your brain, keep it like working as it was designed. And it's too much to know. Like, there's so much that goes on, and the better we can be with just saying, you know what, I think something's wrong. I don't quite feel right today. I should probably see somebody about that. And it may just be, you know what, I haven't been eating well, and so that's affecting my mood. It's not a mood disorder. It is that I'm just, I stopped eating well during the pandemic, or I sleep too much, or I don't sleep enough. And so that can have other impacts, both physiologically and mentally. And until we figure out how to like course correct, sometimes it can get really bad. Other times, we just become delusional and we're not taking as good a care of ourselves as we can. Because the brain, like, you probably know this, other people know this, but it's not said enough. Your brain is connected to every single thing in your body, and it is taking in sensory information. It is it's like it knows when your kidneys are off. It knows when, your heart is beating too fast, too often. All of those things affect what's happening, not just like physiologically, but also, your mental state. And so it's always important to make sure those two things are like meeting in the middle and you are well, not just because you don't have diabetes or you don't have high blood pressure, but also that you don't have these other stressors that are messing with what's going on up in that beautiful head of yours.
Thinking about this stage where you had a real point of interest, diet and exercise, to what degree can diet affect these diagnoses in a bad way, or exercise? Are those good, bad, or indifferent to some of these conditions?
Yeah, I will give the caveat that I do not study diet and exercise. And it is actually a very interesting science, especially when it comes to the brain. But as you can imagine, what you put in your body, it doesn't just go into your body and into your intestines, your stomach, and then out again. Your body uses whatever you've taken in, and it needs that for fuel, to build other things. Like probably every cell in your body needs a different type of something that can only be had usually by eating it. And so your brain needs that as well. And so if you're eating foods that don't have what you need to build some of these things in your cells, you can have issues, right? Because your body isn't getting enough protein, or your body isn't getting enough fat, so it's not able to use the fat that it needs to do other things. And so not eating well isn't just something that like, oh, maybe it'll affect how you look, but it affects how your body is able to function. And so thinking about eating foods that have nutrients and things that your body needs is always important. How you can get that. Some people do supplements, other people just, I have a friend, she always says, I drink my greens. I don't like vegetables, but I'll drink it. When you put it in a smoothie, I can consume it that way. However you need to get it done, making sure that your body has those things. And of course, it can also impact just how you think about yourself, especially when you think about what society says about certain foods, how people judge different things. And that can also inadvertently create other emotional and mental disturbances. And so I don't think we often realize how what we see society doing or saying about certain things also can have an impact on us. Exercise is the same way. Exercise is really good for cardiovascular. Your heart should be pumping and moving blood around sort of more than just when you're sitting down. I mean, it's doing that all the time, but sometimes you need it to kick it up to make sure that everything is working properly, your muscles are oxygenated. So exercise is useful for that, not just, again, for how you look and, you want to look good or you want to do whatever, but it's actually really helpful. And also, when I was in high school, I did a research internship and I worked on the effects of exercise on the brain. And we were using an animal model, but it turns out that mice have better learning and memory skills after they have been running for however many hours a day on like a running wheel. And so I haven't followed with that research, but there is some research to suggest that adults, humans can have the same impact, that exercise can actually help how your brain functions. So there's all sorts of benefits to taking care of yourself that have nothing to do with the aesthetics, right? Like if you want to work out to look good, that's your business, go for it. But there's also something to be said about how it makes you feel. You see a lot of older people who work out, they like to do that sort of thing, or they stay active, maybe not working out like at a gym, but they go outside, they kayak, they hike. They tend to have better health outcomes simply because they're constantly moving their bodies around. They're probably more mentally well as well. So there's a lot of things to be said for what we put into ourselves and what we do with our bodies that can really change a lot of things about who we are and how we work or how we interact in the world.
Did you become so interested in this topic? Because you're really into this, and it's awesome that you're in it and bringing this insight to the world. Why was it this? Out of all the things in science that you could have studied, what brought this to the threshold for you?
It's so funny you ask that because I don't know. I'm a woman of faith, and I believe that this is sort of just a God-given purpose, and how things align really just stuck to me in a way that I could not have designed myself. I I could tell you now, I never really thought much about the brain until I started studying it. So when I was in high school, my junior year, we had chemistry. So usually your freshman year, you don't take a science. Sophomore year, you take biology. Junior year, you take chemistry. So I'm taking chemistry. I love my chemistry teacher. And he took me aside one day towards the end of the semester and said, I want you to apply for this summer internship.
Okay.
And like I told you, I thought science was for old white men. And I was like, and he was an old white man. I was like, yeah, I don't think so. And he's like, I really think you should do it. It's paid, which now I'm like, tell me more. Paid internship, and it's opportunity to be at one of these very prestigious universities in San Diego. So I told my mom about it. She's like, oh my God, you have to do it. It's going to be so good. And I'm less excited, but I applied anyway. I was like, look, it couldn't hurt to like make money and be on the beach during the summertime. Yeah. So I applied, I got in, and I end up in this lab that studies learning and memory. And well, they study a lot of things, but the person I was working with studied learning and memory as effect or as a byproduct of exercise and other things. And when I started learning about it, just knowing about it, knowing something that I never had ever considered before was fascinating to me. And I had the most boring job, Matthew. I can't even tell you. Day in and day out, I would sit at a table, I would slice little brains and just like into little teeny tiny slices, like paper, thinner than tissue.
Like a real brain?
A real like mouse brains, not human brains, but little mouse brains.
In high school.
In high school, every day I would do that. And then that was like a couple of weeks. And then the next couple of weeks, I would stain the tissue and I would, to little markers that are in the brain. And then I would be at a bench day in, day out, like putting them onto slides. And then another week I would spend in a dark room counting cells on a microscope. And that sounds like if you had told me that's what I would have been doing, I'd be like, I'm absolutely not going to do that. That's terrible. I loved every minute of it because I'm discovering something that nobody else knows. Like we have ideas about what's happening, but I got to figure out that this very complicated, thing inside of our skulls is doing all of this stuff when we're not like, we don't even have to do anything other than just like exist or run on a wheel or do whatever. And that moment was extremely eye-opening for me. And I was so fascinated with the idea that I get to contribute to new information that people don't really know or they speculate about. And that's sort of what got me interested in science. Now, I still didn't want to be a scientist. I still was like, I'm only a Black girl in this lab and I don't know if this is really for me, but I can do it. And that was more important to me than anything, that I'm a person who is capable of this. I know so much. And it just so happened that anytime I applied to research internships after that, when I was in college, so I could get paid and I could spend my summer doing something that would look good on a resume, I got placed into neuroscience labs because that was what I sort of had a background in. Yeah. And I loved it. Like, I don't know if I would have picked anything else, but that they picked it for me. It just felt like it was meant to be. And so I continued to just learn how fascinating the brain is, all these things that happen just normally, but also really terrible things that happen when things go bad. Like I did Alzheimer's research and understanding like what's happening in people's brains. This is still kind of a mystery even now. It's so cool. And I think just even for parents, sometimes you can't orchestrate what's going to happen. Like even if a kid is super interested in something like writing, that may not be the thing that they ultimately end up doing, right. But having the option, the curiosity, the ability to just explore and figure out what they like to do, can have such an impact on them. I don't know if I would have, I don't know if I would have chosen to be a scientist, even knowing how cool science is, but I love that I never thought like, I can't do that because I'm this or I'm that, or I'm not good enough or whatever. I knew that I could compete if I wanted to. And that was more than enough for me to feel like I had this confidence going into adulthood, that I had so much to offer in terms of skills and talents, but also interests. Like I love talking about the brain. The brain is so complicated. Like there's so much that I don't know, even of what I studied like 7 years of my PhD for. And yet I love to talk about it. I'm always happy to read more things. I work in an institute where there's nothing but neuroscience research. And I listen to people talk like, oh my God, that is so fascinating. Like, there's so much going on. So yeah.
All right, maybe one more thing, because I want to try to be helpful for the parents that are potentially watching this video. What can we all do to help ensure our adolescent kids are getting the support they need and intervention if there's a need for intervention? Because for what I could tell, most mental health disorders, the level of self-awareness, I haven't seen a lot of cases where the person is self-aware of it's only through third-party observation and suggestion and coaching that they have to trust the people that are telling them about their behavior. So how do we support our kids, and what are some good strategies to intervene and get them to a solution or some therapy if we're observing something that isn't quite right?
Yeah, I think intuition can go a long way, right? Like if someone's telling you your kid has ADHD, but it's only because they don't sit still in class, does that sound right? Look, but let's explore it more. Like, why not? Again, everyone is a scientist. We all have questions. We all want to know, like, let's put this person in different contexts. So I think trusting sort of how you feel about something if it doesn't seem right, but also allowing yourself the opportunity to maybe not know. I think so often we, especially Black folks and other people of color, we feel like not knowing or someone telling us we don't know something, that it's an insult to us personally. And it doesn't have to be that way. Now I know why that is, because, we've had a long history of foolishness that has been done to us and without our permission. But I think we also have to trust that we don't know everything and that there may be other people out there, and getting second, third, fourth opinions can really help. And even asking your family members, hey, have you noticed so-and-so acting this way, or do they act that way when they're with you? Because sometimes kids, they get in certain contexts, and when they know that they can play the card, they go ahead and do it. And then when they're around you, seem like a perfect little angel. Like they're always well behaved. They've all, there's never anything off. And so I think parents have to just allow themselves to observe and to ask questions and to not be afraid to say, I think something might be wrong. But also allowing yourself like the space to maybe get it wrong. Like maybe you got it wrong. Maybe what you thought was an issue wasn't an issue, or maybe what you thought was normal wasn't normal. And that is going to happen all the time. I mean, I don't have children. I have nieces and nephews, and I know how stressful it can be to feel like you have to be a perfect parent, that you have to get it right all the time. And life is not like that. I can tell you just from studying, the literature on adolescence, it's messy and it's complicated, and there's nothing you can do as an adult to make it not that way. Our brains are wired for us to just go wild when we are of a certain age, because we're preparing for adulthood, right? And so if we think about it in this way, that this is sort of evolutionary, something that's going on in all different types of animals, it gives us a little bit like a feeling of a relief that, okay, so this doesn't have to be a bad thing, but you gotta rein some things in. So having rules, having a desire to figure out what's going on, but also giving yourself some grace to say, I might get it wrong. I want to do what's best. And it may end up not that way at all. Like you may go your whole life and not know until, 30 that, oh, actually my kid has been suffering with major depressive disorder, had no idea, because we also, as humans, we fake it. We're always faking it. We're always trying to pretend like nothing is wrong, or we don't know that other people aren't like us. And this doesn't even have to be a bad thing. I have a friend who, he's a synesthete, and it's called synesthesia. And it's basically a condition of people sense things differently. So like if you say numbers, he hears color, like he sees colors when you say the number 3, like there's a certain color attached to that. Wow. Now, 3 is just a number. There's like, we don't necessarily attach anything to that, but synesthetes are people who like hear color or see sounds, if that makes sense. It sounds sort of weird, but that's something that happens with these very small population of people who do it. He did not know that other people did not hear in color or see or attach certain things to like numbers that like he did. He just thought that everybody did that, and it wasn't something strange until one day I saw this book, and I took a picture of it and I sent it to him. I was like, hey, you should read this book because you have synesthesia. And he goes, so you mean all people don't operate this way? I was like, oh no, honey, that is very specific to you and like other like really brilliant musicians. I think Questlove is also a synesthete. Yeah. And so it's so interesting. So even with things that are not necessarily, bad or harmful to us, we think that everyone thinks the same way or views the world in the same way, and they have no idea that they're different. And so sometimes we also just won't ever know what's inside of someone's brain unless they tell us or they share with us. So
Yeah.
I think there's just a lot to be said that this is all a learning process. Life, you will be learning things forever about yourself, about the people around you, and to just, you know, ring the alarm when something seems wrong, but also not feel bad if you didn't ring the alarm or you rang a false alarm because you cared and you wanted to make sure that things were okay. I think that's the best we can do. We're never all going to be mental health experts,
No,
neurologists, like we can't do it, but we can just be a little bit more observant and, you know, kind of check in with folks and see how they're doing, and hope for the best and make sure they have the support, right? Like that you're willing to give them the support if you can. You know, we are not all blessed to have the same amount of resources or access to things. But there are becoming many more things out there for people to have access to at least try to figure out how to, you know, get the help that they need.
Dr. Matthews, this has been absolutely fascinating. Every drop of it. You're going to have to do. So I won't bother you for a couple months, but if you could, I'm going to, as I mature as a parent and continue to connect with our customers and our community, I'm going to have more questions. Can we do this again in a couple months?
Absolutely. I would love that.
All right. I'm going to have all news. Now that I know about your childhood, that's out of the way. We can get right into the mental health.
We can focus on something else.
Yeah. Wonderful. All right. So to everyone that watched the video, please like the video and subscribe to our channel so we can have you back again. Thank you, Dr. Matthews, so much for your insight.
Thank you.